Thank you, Mike. With that lecture, I need to ramping up. So my name is Hanan El-Khazan, and I'm going to show you a biological-inspired machine learning based on those ideas that you just heard. So basically, to ramping up the ideas here, that we also that cells are highly dynamic, highly adaptive to the environment. They have, Mike didn't like that word, but it's emergence phenomenon in that sense. And I don't like the second word, degeneracy, but cells have that kind of that word. And meaning that cells can adapt in many ways to inside malfunctions and outside malfunctions. And just to remind you, and that's that kind, I will do that a couple of times in these slides. Cells, all of the cells that in our body contain the same genome contents. They all have the same exact one, but they decide in a stage in the stem cell area and the stem cell stage to each one of them to become a different cell. One of them can become a skin cell, one of them can become a muscle cell, one of them can become a neuron. Each one of them have completely different job. So in a way, we already see that genes are not the whole story here. And the majority story comes from what happened to those genes. So in a way, genes are some sort of function regularizers. They've been used to be composed to make a protein hardware level that give or empower the cell most internal properties that it have. So in a way, the environmental and the inputs that the cell have is what trigger what we call gene regulatory system inside the cell to decide and go to the right location on the gene and implement it. And then it sends it to an RNA and protein, and that's what make the cell to change their morphology, the stage, the structure, everything. So what we're going to try, I'm going to show you in this lecture, I'm going to show you one process that we just discovered that it's very, very like what evolution is a diffusion evolution. And just like a diffusion evolution, it's just emit or a generative model, like most of generative model, emit a gene expression that we're going to use later on. So, but before I am unpacking the concept of diffusion and evolution, let me, one remark. Have you noticed that most of the problems that we use are sort of optimization problems? And all of them, if not most of them, if not all of them, use backpropagation. Backpropagation is the king of the round now today. Nobody is challenging that because it's based on everything, and I can ramp up 20 minutes only on how backpropagation is not even close to what biology offers. Is not how biology learned, but it's good engineering tool. So, but the whole thing of engineering tool is that in a way, our concept of building our tools is a top-down monolithic paradigm. We have a task, we build a monolithic, build huge kind of neural network that solves that task. In this example, for example, we have Nano GPT, which have 85,000 parameters, and this is the smallest one. And all its job is to predict the next token, the likelihood of the next token, regardless of what we think it know or have in its weights, whatever we think it is, just what it's doing, predicting the next token. So that's not how biology should or would work, and that's not how, if we would like to build a better machines, that's not the way that I think we should go. So let's start with what is a genetic algorithm. I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, know that, but just to be on the same page, genetic algorithm is the reduction of evolution or Darwinism evolution. In a way, we use three different functions, selection, crossover, and mutation. We have gene pools. We select randomly some gene pools from that random soup. And we use crossover, meaning take some parts of that gene pool, take some parts of that gene pool, merge them together, and just run it with it. Sometimes we also use the mutation, going to one of the gene expression and flip it. Let's see what happens. Usually what we'll get, if we did the right job, we will get that kind of graph. If we see that graph, I'm like laying down and everything is fine. But that's the usual evolution algorithm. We don't use that because it's too slow, way too slow compared to backpropagation. Who uses that when you have backpropagation? Another thing that we need to remember, or that I'm going to talk about, what is diffusion process? Diffusion process is a Markov chain process that use diffusion in the way that it taking the information, an image, and then adding noise to that image. And then the diffusion itself try to remove that noise. In the process that it removes that noise, it needs to fill up the information, and that's the interesting part, how it's doing that part, adding up the information. So I'm not going to dive to the code, but just another caveat. Instead of using images, we are using strings of parameters. And basically, from the perspective of the computer program, both are then the same. Images are a set of numbers. Either you're going to view them as a JPEG, or you can use them as a parameters. Same for the algorithm. But in our case, we're going to use them. So we try to work with diffusion, and we notice very, very similar ideas. Diffusion is actually a different form of evolution. In a way, it's actually an inverse evolution, because what we're doing is destroying information and then try to redefine or create those information based on the fitness score. So all we need to know is what is the fitness score. And that's the missing link. Diffusion is technically evolution. And if to put them on one slide together, both of them start in random process. One of them, the evolution, have the natural selection, while the diffusion have the denoising part. And when the perturbation, we have the mutation, and the diffusion have the denoising part, diffusion part, sorry. So, and if you want to be going even more fancy, because there are way more algorithm in evolution algorithm, so we can use weight averages or Gaussian weight, and all of them have the equivalent in diffusion. So basically, we can just use diffusion in the same way that we're using evolution, just replacing images with parameters. So, but there is another missing part. We do eventually going to use neural network in the end, because that's the best way that we know how to remove noise from the images. But before we going to use the neural network, we did try a couple of a test. We use a Bayesian statistic probability in order to remove the noise. So basically, we have the whole process without any neural network, without any backpropagation, trying to do evolution using no matter on the process of diffusion. And that worked. And surprisingly, it worked actually very good. So this is a synthetic data. We immediately run and try that synthetic data. And you can see that's, again, very toy models, 2D models that try to have multiple maximum points, and the algorithm try to fit them all. You can see immediately that the diffusion evolution didn't take the first place. It took the second place. But later on, something we call a latent diffusion model actually took the first place. And what even more strikingly, and we go higher to higher dimension, most of the algorithms start to fail, In ours, actually just ramp out. So it seems that this algorithm going very well with higher dimension. Another thing that we just finishing this synthetic data, so we just run out to do the MNIST of the reinforcement learning. We run it on Acrobat, Cartpool, Mountain Car. There is 2 versions of them, Pedalum, and all of them, as you can see, we either get the first location or the first place or the second place, depend on the latent space or not. So we don't need neural network in order to use diffusion algorithm. But that's not the whole story, apparently. If we do use the neural network, we're getting something that we didn't succeed to get before. And that's what we are having, and this is the example from the diffusion or GAN in a short, when the neural network learn what the missing information need to add it up. It's not only removing the information, it's also try to fill up the gap from that information. So by that process, if you do that process iteratively all the time on images, the neural network learn in the latent space of that neural network how we can play with the different parameters. So that neural network, you can find 2 locations where you can find a younger person or very older person and try to go on in the latent space all the way in that slide, and you can change the appearance of that person. You can have glasses, without glasses, with facial hair, without facial hair. All of those. And why is that? Because the neural network actually learned the meta information under the line of the diffusion. So we use that, and once we use that, we get something that we didn't get at before. In this case, we also try to identify the highest point, or in this case, the green point. But in this case, the environment change. The environment all the time change on the fly. And the best evolution algorithm, I was unable to adapt quickly enough. However, our model, the diffusion, able to adapt much, much quicker. And not only that, we can find a way to tweak that adaptation. So in a way, we can control that number of adaptation. So we got a model that able to adapt to a different scenarios on the fly during iteration. Another thing, not all of the problems that we have only one solution. Some of the problems, we have more than one solution. It seems that this algorithm able to control and balance the sampling around the maximum points that it found in the parameter space. And this is something that we didn't consider that before. It seems if you later on, if you want, I can go later on that other slide. If you look over the best algorithm, evolution algorithm that you have there, it actually captures most of the high points in the synthetic test. But it's also wasted a lot of sampling in places that it shouldn't place. It shouldn't go. Why? Because that's the algorithm tried to do. And in this diffusion, it's able to balance it internally. So what we show in summary, we show that the diffusion evolution as a generative model able to adapt on the fly with using a more iterative iteration and able to produce a genes expression on all of it. I thought that to be saving, I thought I will hear some yelling from the crowd, wait, did you promise me something like more adaptive than that? Like, no? Okay. So probably you think that. So in order to make it even more adaptive, instead of taking the parameters and fit it to the task itself, now we're taking the parameters and fit it to a neural network without actually training it. The neural network will solve the problem for us. So what we need to find is the weights for the neural network that will be adaptive to that environment. So in a way, we are taking off part of the pressure from the environmental change to have more intelligent to the neural system to adapt in different time scales. And in that case, not only that we have that ability to adapt to more time scales, we get another option, something that, again, based on the diffusion. And this actually a framework that we call HADAS, and I will jump because of the time. If you know, based on your experience from Midjourney, on other models, you take a generative model and you ask it to generate an image that you never saw before. Hopefully that's not a stage, but we never that before. And an image with an astronaut and a horse riding on the moon. He know each one of them, he know how to compose it, and how he do that because it constrain the diffusion to have a sampling in area that he know that both of those features exist. Very similar to the facial hair and the edge of the person. So we use the same technique this time to constrain the algorithm to solve a different task. And this one, we use the lunar lander. Yes, the lunar lander, which the target was first landed on the moon safely. Use the thrusters in enough space and don't run out with fuel, enough to land on the moon. But another question, we ask it to turn off the thrust after it learned. Once it learned, it need to turn off the thrust. What we got after running it with the search algorithm, we got an evolution that find the right solution for us exactly with that kind of constraint. It land it on the moon and turn off the thrust. And since it's a neural network, it's going to be adapt to not one solution that it's been trained off. It's going to be trained for many, many other solutions. So thank you for your attention. I know that I over the time. Thank you, Mike, for the incredible lab that you have, and for Ben and Yambo for the working with me on this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a few questions. First of all, thank you very much for this brilliant talk. I really, really enjoyed it. We already have one question over there, so we're going to give the mic over to you.
I recommend question to Mike. I'm here.
Yes, so thank you very much for this very nice talk. I have one clarifying question. Maybe I didn't understand it properly. So the way I understand evolution, it doesn't have any goal. But if you map it onto these diffusion processes, then typically there are goals, because you take a bunch of images, you blur them, and then you reverse time, and you learn it backwards. So in other words, you know which image you want to go to. So in this way, I fail to see the connection between the diffusion models as a paradigm for your evolution. Could you comment on that?
What thing is missing is that evolution do have a goal. It's have a fitness score. So you would like to maximize those fitness score. And that's exactly what you're doing in diffusion, which you would like to maximize that fitness score, the same exact one.
But it's different, because if you have a fitness, you know, like a traveling salesman problem, you have a fitness, but you don't know the solution.
Right.
So you cannot blur from the solution. There's a difference between having a solution to the traveling salesman problem and having a fitness that has as optimum the solution of the traveling salesman problem.
I don't need to know the solution. What I need to know is my hope to D. In a traveling salesman problem, I need to minimize the number of time that travel. Right. That's a fitness. So give me the minimum location that you have.
But the diffusion starts not from the cost function, but it starts from the solution of the cost function.
No, so it starts from random. Also,
you have to blur before to deblur, right? So you have to blur from something. You have to blur from the solution.
That's in the training phase. When
right, exactly.
Yeah. But the testing phase.
No, that's different. But in the training, to build the machine, you need to do blurring. And you have to blur from something. You have to blur from a solution.
So you blow from, you do, actually, in two phases here, you just not need to blow. You just need to know how to remove the noise. So you don't need to learn what the target, you just need to know what's the noise.
Okay, we'll have to take this offline. That's
Okay.
for now. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
Question for Mike here. First of all, thank you for this amazing presentation and the work that you've done. I know I'm probably not alone in this room and being incredibly inspired by the work that you've done over the years. And I do have one question, and if you don't want to answer it, that's fine. But I'm curious how you think your work relates to, or if you have a perspective on Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance, and if you think there's anything to it beyond sort of the normal physical mechanisms you've already explored, or if you think there could be something more as he has posited.
Yeah, thank you for that. The way I understand Sheldrake's model is that there's a kind of sensitization at work in the universe that basically when the same process happens some number of times, it becomes easier for that process to happen again and again. And this is something that behavioral scientists would call sensitization. I suspect that it actually goes much further than that. I suspect that if we knew how to look, we would be finding not just sensitization, we would be finding all and probably more of the kinds of phenomena that we see in the behavioral science handbooks. I suspect that we are really very bad because of our own evolutionary origins. We're very bad at noticing these kinds of cognitive toolkits at different scales. Things that are very large or very slow or very fast, and so on. And so my suspicion is that, and again, this is just a suspicion. It's difficult to test some of these things, but some others are being tested. That if we were to do a more unbiased look, such as when we looked at chemical networks and looking for things like associative conditioning, nobody had done that before because it just seemed obvious that you just couldn't do that without a more complex kind of thing. Turns out they do. So I suspect the things that Rupert has been talking about are just the tip of the iceberg, really. And I'll just comment on one other thing which relates, I think, to the previous question, which is that we have to, I think one of the key things that we have to break in order to have this wider understanding of the potentially cognitive properties in unfamiliar embodiments, we have to break with binary thinking. So this notion that evolution doesn't have a goal, and then certain kinds of brainy animals or algorithms, they do have a goal. That binary distinction, I think, has to go because it's very limiting. There are degrees and different ways in which goal directedness can manifest in different systems, and you can have a goal that is not the same thing as a full-blown, I know what my goal is and I'm planning to reach it and all this kind of stuff. Like that's the full-blown kind of far end of it. But goal directedness can be, there are many steps between totally random, which is of course the standard assumption in most biology that evolution, that the engine of evolution is random. There's a lot of difference to cover between that and there's some sort of a master plan where it's all going in some particular direction. A lot of steps in between, and in particular the fact that the mapping between the genotype and the phenotype is not it's neither a straightforward direct mapping, nor is it some big hairy sort of some big complicated hairball that just makes everything very complex because of redundancy and pleiotropy and all that. I mean, yes, that's there, but I think, and this is, we could talk for hours on for the evidence around this, the actual mapping is itself a process of problem solving intelligence. And because the mapping of genotype to phenotype has this problem-solving capacity to it, with the different degrees of it in different spaces, the whole thing ends up being quite the properties. And we've modeled this. We have a number of papers showing what it's like to do evolution on an agential material, a material that doesn't just do whatever the hardware says, but it actually has the ability to interpret the genome and solve problems. Evolution looks very different on that process. And I think we just, the same thing when we look at materials, when we look at large scale things that Rupert looks at, if we give up that binary frame and we understand that we're dealing with a spectrum and we have many tools in the behavioral science toolbox to deal with it, I think we'll be much better off and discover lots of new science.
Thank you. I think we have to move on to the next session.
Let me just ask one more question since we're going deep into the weirdness here. So I know Rupert Sheldrake. I'm somewhat inclined toward those ideas also. I wonder what's your intuition about the existence of this weird sort of phenomenon within purely digital systems, which can be quite complex, self-organizing, autopoietic patterns in their own level.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I'll just say is that the topics that I have only one criterion. I don't know what's weird and what's not weird because I think our intuitions are so bad that we're really not. It's way too early to know what's truly weird and what's not. But for me, the criteria for all of this is engagement with experiment. So the things that I was talking about today, I'm able to talk about them now, and I hadn't been 5 years ago. I wasn't talking about any of this stuff because now I think we have actual experimental work that is facilitated by some of this stuff. So to me, these things become a fodder for mainstream discussion when they become actionable in the laboratory, when they drive new biomedical engineering, new regenerative medicine, that's in our lab, and so on. And so I think some of these ideas are sort of still some distance away from that, and some are quite actionable now. But I think that one thing that we've I think badly misunderstood is this idea that somehow in biology, when people say to each other, isn't it amazing that we have properties, capabilities, thoughts, feelings, expectations, memories, plans, and all of this kind of mental content is really not, that story is not encompassed by the story of biochemistry. Yes, we're all made of chemicals. Presumably, the biochemistry tells the story of the chemicals, but we are really more than that. And everybody's kind of okay with that. Everybody's kind of okay with this idea that biochemistry does not tell the entire story of intelligence. But somehow when it comes to engineered artifacts, we've created these formal models, digital computation, Turing machines, algorithms, all this stuff. We've somehow decided that, okay, those formal models, they tell the whole story of the machine, right? That's fine. That's and that underlies a lot of this binary thinking where people say, okay, well, machine, everybody writes papers, machines can never do this and they can never do that. And it's all predicated on this notion that there is this restricted thing we call machines or simple materials, where our formal models they tell the entire story of what this thing is capable of, and where people tend to be able to let that go for biology because they somehow think complexity breaks it. My suspicion is that nothing is the kind of dead matter or dumb simple machine that only does what the algorithm tells it to do. What we've seen in very simple models, including sorting algorithms and then some other stuff that will be published later this fall, it tells me that probably nothing is really fully explained by those kinds of things, and we really need to understand how some of these conventional formal models are really theories of the front end interface, and that they don't capture everything that's going on. And I think the aspects where these, for lack of a better term, intrinsic motivations are bleeding through even the simplest kinds of digital algorithms, I think is going to have massive implications for AI.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we will end this keynote talk. Thanks again. And we will now move to the last paper session of this year's conference here in Reykjavik. Session 9, Intelligence Theory Formalism. And with that, I would ask Kyle Fuller to the stage. They are going to talk about resource relativized Leck-Hutter intelligence. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no one after this guy. Yeah. 15 minutes probably. Yeah.